They called it Invincible. But the Pacific War's most feared fighter wasn't broken in a dogfight. It was cracked open by an upside-down airplane in an Alaskan marsh. Picture this: fog rolling over the Aleutians, engines droning, a Navy patrol plane searching for a way home. Through a brief tear in the clouds, the crew spots red roundels, the rising sun, on the wings of a fighter lying belly up in wet grass. Not shredded, not burned, intact. In that moment, on a lonely strip of Akutan Island, the legend of Japan's unbeatable Zero began to unravel. If you watch to the end, you'll see how a handful of test flights turned terror into tactics, and why one pilot's notes would save lives across the Pacific. This is Akutan Zero, the capture that cracked Japan's Invincible fighter. Let's rewind to a month earlier. The date is June 1942. While carriers clash at Midway far to the south, the northern front is ablaze. Dutch harbor attacked, the Aleutians under pressure, among the pilots launched. For those strikes is a 19-year-old flight petty officer named Tadayoshi Koga, flying a Mitsubishi A6M2 Model 21, what Allied reports simply call the Zero. Over Dutch harbor, his aircraft is hit. Not a catastrophic explosion, just one crucial wound to a vital system. He turns east toward a known emergency landing area on Akutan. From the air, the surface looks solid, safe. It isn't. The ground is marsh. The gear bites. The airplane flips, and the cockpit comes to rest inverted. Koga does not survive. His wingmen, bound by orders to destroy aircraft downed in enemy territory, but hoping he might still be alive, choose not to fire. They depart, and the wreck lies hidden by weather and terrain. Weeks pass. Then, during a patrol on July 10, 1942, a U.S. Navy PBY spots the overturned fighter. A landing party returns the next day. They approach carefully, expecting booby traps or a rescue attempt. Instead, they find an airplane that seems to defy the war's grim logic, a near-complete Zero. Recoverable, the fallen pilot is buried with respect nearby. The salvage crews get to work. The Aleutians don't make anything easy. Fog, wind, and rough water stall the first attempts, but persistence wins. A barge finally reaches the site. Sailors and Seabees drag the airframe out of the marsh, nurse it across the beach, and send it south by ship. The destination: Naval Air Station North Island, near San Diego. Under armed guard, because souvenir hunters are a real threat, the Zero is rebuilt. And here is where the mystery deepens. Every American mechanic, pilot, and engineer who touches the airplane expects a crude copy, a clunky machine propped up by propaganda. What they find is something else: a masterclass in weight reduction, thin skins, minimal structure where others are heavy, systems designed to hit aggressive range and maneuver targets. The team notes the obvious trade-offs too. No armor behind the pilot, no self-sealing fuel tanks, no armored glass in the windscreen. Choices. Intentional ones. Ask yourself, what kind of fighter throws away protection in a war that's starting to look like a marathon, not a sprint? The answer, why this mattered and how the U.S. exploited it, comes later. For now, focus on the incredible fact that an intact frontline enemy fighter has been placed in American hands, and it's about to fly. By late September 1942, the Zero is ready. The Navy assigns one of its most trusted test pilots, Lieutenant Commander Eddie R. Sanders, to take it up. He climbs into a cockpit built around a very different design philosophy. Tight quarters, excellent visibility, everything pared down. The engine starts cleanly. On takeoff, the airplane leaps forward and lifts in a short roll. In the sky, the controls feel light, almost eager. At lower speeds, the aircraft turns with startling agility. So this is the legend, he thinks. This is the machine that humbled Allied pilots from China to the Coral Sea. But test pilots aren't here to be impressed. They're here to measure, to probe, to map an aircraft's strengths and its limits. Sanders begins a series of flights, 24 in all, stretching from late September into mid-October. He records what the Zero does exceptionally well, and where it falters. Piece by piece, a picture forms. Not an invincible superweapon, but a specialized tool with edges so sharp they cut both ways. Meanwhile, word spreads through the fleet, quietly at first, then with growing urgency. We have one. We're flying it. We're learning. In wardrooms and ready rooms, pilots who once trained to avoid turning with a zero at all costs start to hear specifics they can use, not rumors, not myths, data. Before we reveal the exact discoveries that flipped the Air Wars script, let's step back and understand why the Zero held such power over early war skies. From the first clashes, Allied pilots reported an opponent that climbed fast, turned inside them, and showed up in numbers at ranges they didn't expect. Carrier-based and yet somehow able to escort strikes far beyond what seemed possible, the A6M2 wrote the playbook for long-range offensive fighter operations over the Pacific. Speed, agility, and reach, those were its calling cards. How did the designers buy all that performance? By shaving every ounce they could. Weight saved as range gained and turn rate won. That's simple. But every ounce cut from armor or tank protection is a chance taken with a pilot's life. In a short war, maybe you accept that. In a long war, the bill comes due. Now set that design on a test range with American cameras rolling and checklists in hand. The goal is simple. Understand, then counter. When the Zero's flight envelope is plotted across airspeed and altitude, a pattern emerges. At certain speeds, the controls are feather-light. At higher speeds, they stiffen. In some maneuvers, the engine is a willing partner. In one particular case, it isn't. If you're a fighter pilot trying to survive a merge, these aren't trivia, they're escape routes. And the Navy doesn't keep the lessons locked in a filing cabinet. Training syllabi change, tactics evolve. Don't dogfight it becomes do this instead. Bomber formations get more effective cover. Carrier fighters adopt new rhythms. Climb, dive, strike, extend, reset. Confidence, so scarce in those early months, begins to return. But let's keep the strongest cards for later, because the way those test notes translate into real-world survival is the heart of this story, and it's coming. First, the human part. Remember how this all began. A young Japanese pilot, a hard landing in a treacherous marsh, a decision by his comrades not to fire on the wreck. War is made of choices like these, some tactical, some moral, some that ripple far beyond what anyone on scene can predict. The Americans who found the aircraft treated the fallen with respect and recovered the airplane with care, not just because it was valuable, but because they knew it could end the killing sooner if it taught them how to fight smarter. And it does. In the weeks after the Zero takes to California skies under a U.S. test pilot, mock combats begin. Wildcats, Warhawks, Lightnings. American types square off against the captured fighter one by one. Cameras click. Clipboards fill. Patterns repeat. What the Zero does brilliantly becomes predictable, and so do the moments when it can be forced into positions it doesn't handle well. You can already feel where this is going. From fear to familiarity, from unfamiliar strengths to exploitable weaknesses. But the keystone discovery, the one that turns a desperate runaway into a practiced escape, deserves its own reveal. Stay with me, because when the test pilot pushes the airplane into a specific kind of maneuver, something unexpected happens. The prop keeps spinning, the airframe is happy, but the heartbeat of the machine, the flow of fuel, does not behave the way American pilots are used to. It's a small detail on the ground, a life or death lever in a fight. And when this detail is shared across the fleet, pilots suddenly have a move that can break the Zero's grip at the exact moment it should have you cold. We'll get there in a second. One more piece of context first. None of this would matter if the lessons weren't spread fast and taught well. The U.S. Navy and Marine Corps take the findings and turn them into checklists, lectures, practice flights. Instructors hammer home a single idea. Don't fight the Zero where it's strong. Force it into your kind of fight. If you can't outturn it, outthink it. If you can't win the circle, win the vertical. If you can't match its bite at low speed, make speed your armor. Okay, you've waited long enough. What did those flights prove? What was written, line by line, into the notes that filtered out to every squadron in the Pacific? First, at higher speeds, the Zero's roll response becomes heavy. Where it dances at lower speeds, it labors as velocity climbs. That means a fast, diving attacker can reverse and reposition more easily than the Zero can follow. Second, and this is the big one, you can make the Zero's engine stumble with the right kind of push at the right moment. In a pursuit where every second counts, cutting the pursuer's power, even briefly, is the difference between being trapped and breaking free. Those are clues. The tactics built on top of them are the solution. And they transformed how Allied pilots fought. In the next part, we'll dive straight into the test sequences, the exact pilot reports, and the simple, repeatable moves that turned "never turn with a zero" into "here's how you live to fight again." We'll also see how these lessons shaped training and fed into the arrival of new American fighters designed to dominate where the Zero struggled. If you're ready to learn the move that gave Allied pilots breathing room, and how a single captured airplane taught a Navy to fight smarter, say the word. Here's what those North Island flights revealed, and why they mattered the very next time an Allied pilot saw a Zero in his rear view. At low speed, the airplane was a dancer, light in the hands, responsive, almost effortless in tight turns. But as airspeed climbed, the Zero's grace narrowed. The roll control that felt silky at 180 miles per hour became heavy above about 200 knots. Quick reversals, the kind a defending pilot needs to jink out of an attacker's gun solution, took muscle and time the Zero didn't have at higher speed. And there was an asymmetry. Rolling left felt easier than rolling right. Small findings on a test card, enormous leverage in combat. Then came the moment that changed survival math. In a pushover that put the airframe briefly in -G, the engine balked. The propeller still spun in the slipstream, but fuel delivery stumbled. Power fell away. Level out, and the engine recovered. But the message was crystal. If you're being chased by a Zero, don't tighten the turn. Shove the nose down. Make a clean, committed push, and build speed in the dive. Your engine keeps pulling. His may not. That flicker of lost thrust is your opening to extend and live. Those notes didn't languish in a report. They moved fast. Training officers turned them into simple rules every new pilot could remember under stress. Do not dogfight it slow. Force it fast. Attack from altitude. Fire once. Then keep diving. Regain height and do it again. The phrase boom and zoom spread with new urgency, and the paired defense that some squadrons had already started using. The weaving cross-cover of two fighters that pulled an attacker into one wingman's guns got new confidence behind it. The idea wasn't to outturn a Zero. It was to deny it the one arena where it was king. Mock combats at North Island made the lessons stick. A captured Zero on one side, American types on the other. Wildcats, P-40s, P-38s. Cameras rolled as pilots tested merges, brake turns, rolling scissors, vertical yo-yos. Each film session reinforced the same picture. If you let the fight get slow and flat, the Zero owned the circle. If you kept it fast and vertical, the initiative swung your way. Pilots left the debrief with a checklist in their heads, and, for the first time in months, a sense that knowledge could be armor. Back in the hangar, the mechanics' notebooks told their own story. Every decision the Zero's designers made pointed at range and agility. Thin skins, light structure, equipment pared back to essentials. No armor behind the pilot's seat. No self-sealing fuel tanks. No heavy armored glass. The weight they saved turned into miles of escort range and degrees per second in a turn. Advantages that had shocked Allied airmen in the first months of the war. But the trade-offs were stark. A few hits in the wrong place could turn damage into catastrophe. In a short war, you might accept that. In a long war, every irreplaceable pilot you lose reshapes the balance. The test team didn't mock the airplane. They respected it. On the ground and in the air, the Zero showed real engineering finesse. Clean aerodynamics, precise control feel. A power plant that started reliably and pulled well in its sweet spot. The point wasn't to belittle an opponent. It was to understand him clearly enough to defeat him. As word of the findings reached the fleet, briefing rooms began to change. Tactics lectures led with specifics. If a Zero latches onto you at co-speed and close range, push for the dive. Don't pull. If you must reverse, do it with speed on the airframe and expect his roll to lag at higher velocity. If you're the attacker, take one shot and leave. Don't stick around to turn. If you're flying with a wingman, weave toward each other and make the pursuer cross a cone of fire. Simple, teachable, repeatable. The kind of training that turns panic into procedure. There was a psychological shift too. Before, the Zero had been a rumor made of contrails and gun camera film. Something that seemed to appear out of nowhere, turn tighter than physics should allow, and vanish into the horizon. Now pilots studied a tangible adversary with measurable limits. They knew where it excelled and where it didn't. Fear gave way to respect, and respect gave way to a plan. Meanwhile, in American factories and design offices, new carrier fighters were maturing. The latest models brought heavier structure, more power, armor, and self-sealing tanks as standard. The goal wasn't to build a mirror image of the Zero. It was to field machines that dominated in the regimes where the Zero struggled, and to keep pilots alive when the sky filled with tracers. The captured fighter's flight data validated that path. It confirmed that speed, climb under power, and ruggedness could set the terms of a fight against a lighter, more fragile opponent. The Zero's story didn't end in a test cell. After months of evaluations and demonstration flights, the captured aircraft even appeared before the public. Visual proof that the legend had a real, riveted shape and that its secrets were being studied. Later, it returned to service as a training asset, flying against American pilots so they could feel its strengths and weaknesses in their own hands before facing the Type-in combat. For countless airmen, that rehearsal in California meant the difference between a first encounter and a last one. But this is still a story about one airplane that taught thousands. To see how its lessons rippled across the ocean, you have to look at the squadrons that carried those tactics into fights from the Solomons to the Central Pacific. You have to watch a defending pilot break a lethal chase with a clean forward push, feel a section of fighters weave together and spring a trap, and hear the urgency in the radio when someone calls fast, not flat. Take it down. In the next segment, we'll follow those tactics into combat, how pilots applied the test card truths in real engagements, how training adapted, and how confidence built toward the great carrier battles still to come. We'll also confront the hardest part of this story: why design choices that looked brilliant in 1941 became liabilities by 1944, and what that meant for the men strapped into those cockpits on both sides. When you're ready, let's dive into the fights where the Akutan Zero's lessons paid off and lives saved. Combat turns lessons into muscle memory, and the Akutan Zero's lessons reached the front fast. In ready rooms from the Solomons northward, instructors boiled the test notes down to moves a pilot could execute under fire. Don't get slow and flat against a Zero. Make it fast and vertical. If you're being reeled in, push cleanly forward, build speed in the dive, and break the pursuer's rhythm. If you attack, come from above, strike once, and extend. Don't linger where the Zero's low-speed turn can trap you. On patrols and escorts, sections flew tighter, weaving toward each other to force a tailing Zero across a cone of fire. The idea was simple and repeatable. Cover your wingman and make the enemy choose between a bad shot and a worse one. Where early war fights had dissolved into desperate flat circles, engagements now stretched and steepened. The air war began to favor altitude, timing, and teamwork over brute turning contests. The first time a young pilot tried the new escape move with a Zero closing, it felt wrong to push rather than pull. Every instinct begged for a tightening turn, but training took over. Nose down, a clean forward press, a disciplined dive. The American engine kept pulling. The pursuers didn't always. Even a heartbeat of lost thrust was enough to open the range, and by time to reset the fight. Word of real saves spread squadron to squadron, and the new doctrine stuck because it worked. Back at North Island, mock combats hammered the same truth. Camera pods didn't care about pride. They captured geometry. At low speeds, the Zero flowed. No wasted motion, effortless nose authority. At higher speeds, the rolls stiffened and reversals lagged. Pilots began to script their merges around those facts. If a Zero tried to lure them into a flat, slow circle, they refused the invitation and took the fight up and away. If a Zero pressed a close chase, they traded a little altitude for a lot of survival with that practiced push. The mechanics' notebooks reinforced the why. Everything on the captured A6M2 pointed to range and agility. Thin skins, light frames, control surfaces that felt alive at modest speeds. But there were no self-sealing tanks to shrug off punctures, no armor plate to blunt rear-quarter fire, no heavy glass to shield a head-on pass. The airplane was honest about its purpose: strike far, turn hard, and trust skill and surprise to avoid being hit, against opponents who now knew its limits and flew. Accordingly, those trade-offs became liabilities. As the months turned, new American types arrived in strength: faster, tougher, heavier hitting, and built to fight where the Zero struggled. Pilots who had learned to survive in Wildcats carried the same disciplined tactics into machines with greater climb and dive performance. The goal wasn't to build a mirror of the Zero, it was to control the fight's terms. Altitude became a bank account, speed a shield, and ruggedness a second chance when flak or tracers found home. Confidence followed. Debriefs shifted from "we lived by luck" to "we lived by procedure." The Akutan Zero hadn't erased the danger, but it had removed the mystery. Crews learned what to expect and how to respond. Even the way formations entered combat changed. More emphasis on altitude stacking, more discipline about not bleeding speed in the first turn, more patience about waiting for the high-probability shot instead of chasing a fleeting one. There was respect, too, on both sides of the ocean. Test pilots who flew the captured machine admired its handling at low speed and the elegance of its design. They also knew precisely why they didn't want to meet it in a slow-turning brawl. Allied veterans who once saw the Zero as an unbeatable foe now understood the logic behind its strengths and the cost of those strengths in a long war of replacements and training pipelines on the line. The new playbook saved aircrews. Intercepts started high, slashing passes were brief, and extensions were clean. The section weave turned what had been a lonely duel into a cooperative trap. The negative G break gave a hard-pressed defender a way out that didn't depend on out-turning the unout-turnable. These weren't tricks. They were disciplined applications of what the test cards had proven, and the ripple effects reached beyond tactics. Training syllabi adjusted to drill the lessons early, so rookies didn't have to learn them the first time a Zero slid into their mirrors. Gunnery programs emphasized one good burst from a stable pass instead of long, turning sprays. Maintenance crews, understanding that rugged airframes and protected systems brought pilots home to fight again, pushed hard to keep the heavier machines at peak performance. Strategy and design began to rhyme with the data. Fight fast, fight vertical, protect the pilot, and return tomorrow smarter than today. Still, the Zero remained dangerous wherever the fight slowed and flattened, especially in the hands of experienced airmen. The price of forgetting the new doctrine was immediate. The pilots who survived were the ones who treated the Akutan lessons as guardrails. Refuse the slow circle, keep your energy, trust your wingman, and use altitude like currency. As 1943 became 1944, those habits, grounded in test flights over California and proven over island chains and carrier decks, helped flip the balance of the air war. Hundreds of small engagements added up to a pattern. Fewer Allied fighters were being dragged into the Zero's sweet spot. More fights were decided before the first hard turn, with slashing attacks from above and disciplined exits that denied the counter. On days when the sky filled with aircraft, the side that chose the terms of the engagement tended to come home. But this story isn't finished, and its ending carries a harder truth. The same choices that made the Zero brilliant in 1941 weighed heavily by 1944, when combat became a marathon and experience was a weapon of its own. Pilots who survived could teach. Pilots who didn't could not. The Akutan capture didn't just map an airplane's envelope. It highlighted a philosophy's limits in a long war. In the next part, we'll follow that philosophy to its consequences, how protection and power multiplied experience on one side, while lightness and vulnerability exacted an ever-rising cost on the other. We'll also come back to the captured fighter itself, where it flew next, what it demonstrated in public, and how its final chapter closed. And at the very end, we'll put the strongest card on the table, what this single recovery revealed about designing for victory and why it still matters. Whenever engineers trade weight for speed or protection for performance, by the time those test notes filtered from California to the front, the air war already felt different. Pilots no longer went looking for circles. They hunted for angles. Altitude became banked capital, speed a kind of armor you put on before the merge. You could still lose to a Zero, especially if you forgot the rules. But now the rules were simple enough to remember at blackout heart rate. Refuse the flat turn. Make it fast and vertical. Press forward to break a chase. And trust your wingman to weave you out of trouble. In debriefs, geometry replaced guesswork. Gun camera film showed the same pattern again and again. Slow and level spelled danger. A high, slashing pass followed by a clean extension gave you control. When someone did get dragged into the Zero's sweet spot, The squadron could name exactly where the mistake began, usually with the first pull when a push would have saved the day. On paper, the airplane at the center of this story remained a marvel. Light structure, clean aerodynamics, and responsive controls made the A6M2 a joy at modest speeds and a menace in a close-in fight. But the same notebooks that praised its handling recorded the costs. No armor plate behind the pilot, no self-sealing tanks, and a cockpit without heavy protective glass. Those choices weren't oversights. They were design decisions aimed at range and agility. Decisions that paid off early and began to hurt as the war stretched and experience became the rarest commodity. The captured fighters' test flights didn't just inform classroom lectures. They changed habits in the cockpit. You can hear it in the brevity of the new radio calls. High and fast. One pass. Push now. We've left. Language shrank because the playbook got clearer. Even formations launched differently. More altitude stacked. More discipline about not cashing in speed for a fleeting turn. More patience for the single high. Probability burst instead of a long, low-energy chase. As newer American fighters reached the fleet in strength, those same habits scaled up. With more power and tougher construction, pilots could lean even harder into energy fighting and still come home when flak or tracers found them. Survival wasn't an accident. It was the plan. A pilot who returned could teach. And a pilot who taught multiplied the value of every lesson learned from that upside-down aircraft in an Aleutian marsh. The Zero remained deadly wherever a fight slowed and flattened. Veteran opponents could still punish a mistake, but the panic of 1942 gave way to a steadier confidence built on checklists and practice. Instructors drilled rookies on the escape push, on the discipline of a single firing pass, on the section weave that turned a solo target into a trap. Crews learned to recognize when the geometry was tilting against them and to reset before the tilt became a spin. There was respect in this shift, not contempt. Test pilots who flew the captured machine praised its low-speed grace and its precise control feel. Combat pilots who fought it understood how it had shocked them early on, and exactly why it no longer did when they refused its preferred arena. The enemy hadn't grown weaker overnight. The learning curve had simply turned in the Allies' favor. The captured Zero itself continued to teach. Demonstrations and training flights put its quirks into American hands, so the first time a pilot felt that low-speed magic, it wasn't in combat. The point wasn't to humiliate an opponent. It was to inoculate your own. When you've flown against the real thing, when you've seen how quickly it stiffens at speed and how a clean forward press can shake it loose, the fear of the unknown drains out of the cockpit. What's left is procedure, and procedure wins marathons. As 1943 bled into 1944, the cumulative effect of thousands of disciplined, fast, vertical engagements became visible in the ledger. More Allied fighters came back from missions. More experienced pilots stayed in the roster long enough to mentor the next wave. Squadrons rotated forward with doctrine instead of rumors, and the tactical balance tilted one steady notch at a time. But the hardware at North Island had one more chapter. After its season as a teacher, the captured Zero's career ended not in a blaze of glory, but in a ground accident. Damaged beyond repair in a collision on the field and scrapped soon after, the airframe vanished. The lessons did not. They moved outward, carried in memory and training syllabi, in the way pilots briefed a mission and in the instincts that took over when a blacked and the canopy grew into a threat. Here's the closing arc we still have to draw. The Akutan capture didn't just expose an airplane's limits. It spotlighted a philosophy's limits in a long, industrial war. Lightness and reach can dominate the opening rounds. Protection and power compound across the late ones. One path. Bets on never being hit. The other assumes you will be, and plans for you to come back anyway. In the final part, we'll bring this home. We'll connect the test cards to the design decisions that followed, weigh the cost of speed bought with vulnerability, and ask the question that matters far beyond World War II. When you can't have everything, what do you choose? And who pays the price if you're wrong? Design is doctrine with rivets. And the Akutan Zero proved it. Strip away the mythology and you see a set of deliberate choices. Cut weight to buy range, pair structure to buy turn rate, accept vulnerability to gain agility. In 1941, those choices felt like genius. In a short, shocking war, they were, but the Pacific didn't stay short or shocking. It stretched, mile after mile, sortie after sortie, into a campaign where survival wasn't luck, it was policy. On one side, protection and power compounded experience, armor behind the seat, self-sealing tanks under the wings, airframe stout. Enough to dive hard, take hits, and bring pilots home to brief the next crew. Every return flight multiplied knowledge. On the other side, lightness and reach demanded perfection every time. When perfection slipped, when a single round found a line or a tank, there was often no second chance, no teacher returning from the mission to say, "Here's what to do next time." That's what made the Akutan moment so decisive. It wasn't just an airplane pulled from a marsh. It was a mirror held up to two ways of thinking. Test cards turned into tactics. Tactics turned into training. Training turned into habits that shaped the great carrier battles to come. High, fast, one pass, extend, weave with your wingman, refuse the slow circle. And when the Zero tried to lock you into its arena, push cleanly forward, make it vertical, and live to reset. The captured fighter's public appearances were brief. Its service as a teacher was not. Even after the airframe was gone, the lessons stayed. In briefing binders, in simulator talks, in the muscle memory of pilots who learned to keep their advantage and deny the enemy his. You can measure the impact in quieter ways than scoreboards, in the steady tone of post-mission radios, in the discipline of formations that kept altitude like money in a bank, in the way rookies arrived already fluent in a language once learned only under fire. And there's a human core we cannot skip. Tadayoshi Koga never meant to give his enemies a manual. His loss is part of the tragedy that underlies every technical triumph. The respect shown at the recovery site matters because it reminds us that engineering debates and tactical innovations always cash out in lives. The best lesson you can take from the Akutan Zero is not that one side was clever and the other naive, but that choices made at a drawing board echo through cockpit doors. So what did this capture truly crack? Not just a cowling or a canopy. It cracked the aura, the idea of invincibility. By replacing fear with facts and rumor with repeatable moves, it revealed that an unbeatable machine was simply a specialized tool with edges you could turn against it. And it proved that when you can't have everything, you win by choosing the right things. Protection that brings pilots home, power that sets the terms of the fight, training that turns knowledge into reflex. If this story sharpened your understanding of the Pacific Air War, help it travel. Tap like so the algorithm doesn't bury it. Subscribe for more World War II deep dives built on official sources and clear tactics, not myths. And tell me in the comments, which single trade-off do you think mattered most? Range, maneuverability, or protection, and why? Your take might shape the next episode.